Some time ago, over on the Bible Thumping Wing Nut channel, a Fundy atheist by the name of David Schlessinger, who gets very angry at folks who oppose him and respond to him while looking for attention on another channel. David Schlessinger tried to paint the owner of the channel as a liar, fraudster, basically everything bad, under the sun. I'll loop the video of the comments just so everybody can see all of it. David whines about Tim, and David really means this, censoring others, yet his comment remains up. Odd? David also doesn't understand what free speech is. The Constitution says Congress shall make no law regarding the abridgment of free speech. Not YouTube, not Facebook, but Congress. So David's a little whiner. And a crybaby. And he's stupid. So Tim is within his rights. If he chooses to, he can ban anyone he wants. He's not obligated to allow David, myself, or anyone else to filibuster on his channel. Notice that David's channel is a barren wasteland with a few cut and paste videos and nothing else. Methinks he doesn't see the irony. David wouldn't be allowed to run his mouth on my property, but his comments tell me that he thinks he should be allowed to do so. David is a Fundy atheist. He isn't too bright. Don't be a Fundy atheist. David says, after I ask him if Tim's alleged dishonesty and lying is subjective or objective, quote, Tim purposely says things that he knows is untrue. He purposely mutes objectors while allowing those on his side are allowed to say anything they want and behave badly. Behave badly. He's purposely deceptive objectively, subjectively, directly, indirectly, and, most of all, intentionally. You already made the first blunder. You made it appear as if there was only one way for Tim to be dishonest, or he has to be dishonest in a subjective or objective perspective. He's both all the time. End quote. What? So he's A and non-A at the same time? Keep that in mind for later, folks. It's an important point. I retorted, quote, so rape, remember this definition later as David attempts to circumvent it. So rape, defining rape as a man or woman, forcing another man or woman to have sexual intercourse with him or by using objects against the other party's consent. So rape can be objectively immoral, subjectively immoral, as well as subjectively moral. If it's subjective, it could be good one day and bad the next. Odd indeed. End quote. David then cries about Tim being able to purposely and unintentionally be purposely and unintentionally dishonest. If it's not intentional, then it's not really a problem. Example, if someone asks a friend what 3 plus 3 is and the friend really thinks the answer is 7, then he's not really being dishonest. He's just wrong and mistaken. If the friend knows the answer is 6 and says 7 instead, then he is being dishonest. David refers to the Socratic method as childish and autistically complains about me slicing their onion thinner. David is a Fundy atheist. Don't be a Fundy atheist. He complains multiple times about questions. I told David, quote, if Tim is objectively and subjectively dishonest, and subjective dishonesty would be in the eye of the beholder, much like Burger King is better than McDonald's. If Tim is objectively and subjectively dishonest, at the same time he is A and non-A at the same time, can rape be subjectively immoral, subjectively moral, whatever that means, and objectively immoral all at the same time? You seem to think so, which is pretzel logic. I'm just wondering where your evidence is for this abstract, objective dishonesty Tim is engaging in, end quote. David continues to whine. Quote, at times I cannot for the life of me wonder why you're so willing to carefully split a sentence down to the tiniest atom when you never lived that way in real life. I stated quite clearly that Tim was dishonest objectively and subjectively, end quote. Remember, David's talking a point about splitting a sentence down when you never lived that way in real life. Remember that for later. When we talk about rape later, this will be important. Remember my definition of rape. If David hypothetically saw a woman getting raped by a man, would he inform the rapist, quote, there's nothing wrong with rape, but I personally don't like it, end quote. Hilarious. Again, David repeats that Tim is objectively and subjectively dishonest, which makes no sense and inadvertently admits there are some objective abstract truths in this world. Moral truths. Keep that in mind. David also says, quote, objectively, Tim lies continually. He says things that anyone would admit are not true, end quote. Well, if Tim doesn't admit they aren't true, then your statement is false. This guy's an idiot. I also said, quote, so just so we have this straight, rape is, and I defined rape in one of my previous rebuttals, rape is objectively immoral. It's objectively immoral. It is objectively moral. And at the same time is subjectively immoral and moral. All at the same time? Interesting. Do I have it right? End quote. David whines again, quote, and now rape somehow has a stake in this fight. End quote. Not sure David wants to discuss rape. He didn't. But I continued pressing on. Eventually the old fella said, quote, listen up, quote, oh, and by the way, when it comes to rape, there are people who find it disgusting. There are people who enjoy it, rape fetishes. There are men who love watching videos of it. There are women who ask to have men forced on them. There are people, forced as in quotation marks, forced on them. There are people who want stronger and tougher rape laws while being caught raping children. To consider rape to be only objectively anything is hilarious, end quote. David is essentially arguing that because there are certain people who enjoy watching women get raped, somehow that aids his argument. What is he smoking? There are people who would hypothetically enjoy watching Tim lie. David also wasted a lot more time crying about that. There are people who would hypothetically enjoy watching Tim lie. Using your reasoning, that would negate all his belly aching. In addition, folks wanting tougher rape laws while committing rape means nothing unless David is suggesting, and by his seething anger over it he does, unless David is suggesting that hypocrisy is somehow objectively immoral. There are scores of politicians that preach fiscal responsibility, yet never practice it. There are people who preach against violence, but are the most violent lot in society. Does David think this is news? If women want men, quote, forced upon them, David put forced in parentheses, as I said. If women want men forced on them, it's not really rape. My definition of rape, as I employed it earlier, doesn't fit that. David is essentially saying that there's a possible world where rape, as I defined it, could either be ignored / tolerated or even condoned / encouraged. Remember, this idiot David said Tim is objectively and subjectively immoral, but later scoffs at rape being objectively immoral. What a moron. David keeps trying to make an issue of Tim's alleged dishonesty, which was objectively and subjectively true according to him. Keeps trying to make an issue of Tim's alleged dishonesty and then throws a hissy fit when I try to keep the discussion on items such as rape as I defined it. I use David's Jekyll and Hyde attitude towards morality and Tim's alleged dishonesty as a segue. David then goes on a filler tangent, as I like to call it, complaining about heaven being perfect, theists being dishonest, and then talks about priests kneeling at the altar while fantasizing about young boys. If David is correct, there's a possible world where priests fantasizing about young boys would be ignored / tolerated or even condoned / encouraged. Uh-oh. And if he's not claiming an objective truth here, why does he always go to priests? Why doesn't he talk about somebody in a housing project that never goes to church? It's always a priest because he thinks that's a more powerful example. I told David that I'll wager there's more black-on-black crime than there are priests who molest young boys. I'll also wager a higher percentage of public school teachers engage in statutory rape than priests who molest young boys. David then complains about more questions in his rebuttal. Doesn't like questions. Uses a lot of filler again. Theism is dying. You're an embarrassment. Complains about subjective / objective dishonesty. I'm not sure he even knows what he's talking about. He's on autopilot. If Christianity wasn't dying, David brought this up, Christianity wasn't dying and instead was expanding to the point where David was the only non-Christian, would that negate his point? Remember, he used Christianity as dying as a talking point. Sounds as if David brings up a lot of irrelevant crap. He's mad. David claims even priests know God is not watching, but provides no data on this, another angry rant, and would be another irrelevant point. So you got to slog through a lot of crap here to actually get these idiots on point. I'm assuming from David's examples that he believes rape, as I defined it at the beginning, is objectively immoral and evil. Correct. Where was this during the Big Bang? Do tell. Again, if it's subjective, then there's a possible world where the behavior of these priests could be tolerated/ignored or condoned/encouraged. He complains that comparing black on black crime to priests molesting young boys is proof that I will use anything to make an unrelated point. That's the pot calling the kettle black. I thought we were talking about objective evil. David is getting frustrated. Continuing. David's entire rebuttal to that is nothing but filler. Cries about slicing onions thinner and thinner, blah, blah, blah. I asked David, old Davy, if the decision to rape versus not raping is akin to going to McDonald's today instead of Burger King. David complains again about me asking questions because he doesn't want to answer. David blathers, quote, objective and subjective are two completely different things. Oh, good boy. Objective and subjective are two completely different things and easily defined. But I'll say it another way. My statement was that Tim is purposely deceitful. End quote. Actually, you said Tim was objectively and subjectively dishonest, and your examples about that undercut your own point. As I said earlier, old man, if someone believes something, remember the 3 plus 3 equals 7 example? If someone believes something that was wrong, but honestly didn't know they were wrong, it wouldn't be dishonesty. Knowing that 3 plus 3 equals 6 and saying it's 7, that's dishonest. David then complains about slicing the onion thinner and thinner again. He says, I tried really hard to switch this to an objective-subjective debate, which it has been from the outset. David doesn't pay attention very well. Does David think Tim is still objectively and subjectively immoral? Stay tuned. David attempts to state that this debate has nothing to do with philosophy, stating that Tim is deceptive, and my asking if that's an objective or subjective statement is somehow invalid. He also attempts to segue into a rant about Noah's Ark, but I didn't take the bait. He says for the umpteenth time that he wants this chat thread to stay up and running, as if I need his permission. Again, if rape as I define it is only subjective, then there is a possible world where rape could be ignored/tolerated or even condoned/encouraged. Deciding to rape versus deciding not to rape is akin to going to Burger King or not going to Burger King, right? David, after launching several insults towards theists, now begins whining about insults. What a thin-skinned little baby. David has some more filler suggesting that our discussion of rape has nothing to do with Tim being objectively dishonest. David is twisting himself into quite the knot. He's going to need the Boy Scouts to untie him. David again tells me to keep these comments up, as if I need his permission. I mentioned that David cries about insults, yet tried to paint all priests as pedophiles. David took issue with that, suggesting he didn't mean all priests are pedophiles. Fair enough. David suggests that he wasn't insulted when I countered with black on black crime, but I won't grant him that one. The old guy said, quote, comparing black to black crime is what he said. Comparing black to black crime to men who swear that they believe is a god, only to privately have sex with young boys is clear-cut evidence to me that you'll use anything unrelated to hopefully make a point. End quote. Yeah, David was a bit butthurt over that point. I tell David I have this thread archived, and he counters with a mighty, quote, I bet Tim is paying you, end quote. Okay, dummy. I told him the Koch brothers were paying me. I referenced David saying in the original post on this thread, quote, I do not believe in a God, but if there is one and I am wrong, I'll see you in the pits of hell, brother. End quote. I mentioned that an atheist reversing and bastardizing Pascal's wager is quite interesting. I ask again, is Tim's lying, cheating, and dishonesty objective or subjective? Now David steps in it saying, quote, there's no such thing as an objective truth. It doesn't exist. End quote. Well, do that again. Quote, There's no such thing as an objective truth. It doesn't exist. End quote. Of course, that statement itself is objectively true, correct? David paints himself into a corner. If his statement that there are no objective truths is objectively true, then he just undermined everything he said on this thread. If it's not true, it's a meaningless challenge. Nice one, Gramps. So since it's all subjective, there's a possible world where 30-year-old men forcing 14 or 12-year-old girls to have sex with him, forcing them, could be tolerated / ignored or even condoned / encouraged. David continues shoveling dirt on himself, saying, quote, "No, you just demonstrated using your own example that there aren't objective truths, because although you and I may feel that it's horrible for 30-year-old men forcing 14-year-old girls to have sex, guess what, genius? There are clearly hundreds / thousands of men who do believe that they should force 14-year-old girls to have sex." End quote. Again, is David seriously arguing that because some people like doing heinous things, he's able to stalemate this discussion? Again, this is his frothing, and here's more frothing at the mouth rage from David. Quote, "There are no objective truths, objective moral truths." Is that objectively true? If so, it's self-defeating. If not, it's meaningless. Hilarious. I think David added thousands after hundreds because hundreds didn't sound good enough. So David is saying that there is a possible world. He is saying by extension there is a possible world where rape could be ignored / tolerated or condoned / encouraged. If there aren't objective truths, then his original statement in this thread is meaningless. David is a walking contradiction. David whines that deceit is a hallmark, even arguing in caps. David whines that deceit, objective deceit, is a hallmark of Christianity, and if that's a subjective opinion, it's meaningless. David is a feeble old man just bloviating to make himself feel better. Continuing, Davy says, quote, "I'm stating my opinion. It's subjective, Einstein." End quote. Could have fooled me. Sounds like Davy is retreating now, but there are no objective moral truths, right, David? If that's objectively true, you undermine yourself. Self-defeating. If it's not objectively true, it's a meaningless statement. Meaningless statement like most of Davy's rants. David has made a massive about-face. There are no objective moral truths, then it's just his opinion. What a nut. I'm just saying that Davy is in fact saying that there's a possible world where 30-year-old men who rape 14-year-old girls could either be tolerated / ignored or even condoned / encouraged. That is the logical end to his rants, and he knows it. David yammers, quote, "It's a societal decision. You and I don't like it. Others do. You and I wouldn't kill 6 million Jews for a God, but guess what? Hitler did, and the Nazis claimed it was an objective truth. You simply don't like the fact that a subjective truth is messy, ugly, and sad." End quote. So if society decides that rape, as I defined it, should be not only tolerated but condoned, it's okay. David uses this method a lot. If anyone approves of X, no matter what X is, then somehow X is okay. And he's trying to create a stalemate. So if someone decides shooting starving children is better than feeding them, David will just throw up his wrinkled hands and say, "Duh, someone likes it." Derp derp. Hitler and his ilk believed many races were inferior, and wiping them out was good for the gene pool. Why doesn't David like the societal decision to exterminate Jews? He probably wouldn't like the societal decision to throw him out of his small apartment either. I'm also not claiming that all decisions have a black and white subjective or objective ruling on it. I usually pick items such as rape, as I defined it, and or shooting starving children versus feeding them. See how David reduces the decision to exterminate Jews or not to choosing chocolate over vanilla. If he objects, then he's admitted there's quite a difference between those decisions. Apparently he's abandoned his "there are no objective moral truths" crusade because it is self-defeating. If he's abandoned that self-appointed axiom, then he's basically undercut himself quite nicely. David wasted a lot of time trying to prove, he read it on a blog somewhere, that Hitler was a big bad theist who loved to kill people. David never tried to link Hitler with Christianity, just theism, but the implication was there. I posted links to 2 Tecton TV videos proving that Hitler's positive Christianity was nothing like New Testament Christianity. David spammed them off the board and had another angry fit. Then I respond, quote, "By your comments, David, you're having a hard time answering 2 things. 1, your statement that there are no objective claims, no objective moral truths is an objective claim in and of itself. And if it's not, then you just kneecapped yourself, old man. Heck, either way, you undercut yourself. An uneducated janitor atheist named McCain once told me that atheism makes no claims, which is a claim in and of itself. 2, you need to admit that there's a possible world where rape could be ignored / tolerated or condoned / encouraged." Quoting David, quote, "Now you demonstrate how your objective truth is right and theirs is wrong," end quote. Just kneecapped yourself again. You're saying the scientific method cannot prove that Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, Chairman Mao, etc. did anything wrong. Ergo, you now admit there's nothing really wrong with rape or genocide, despite your dislike for it, in the same way hippies dislike proper hygiene. Keep going. David now sticks to a spot where he thinks he's safe, saying, quote, "Pay attention. A serious follower of Scientology will claim L. Ron Hubbard explains that there is no Christ, and L. Ron Hubbard has made a list of good things / evil things in the world. L. Ron Hubbard has clearly provided the laws and rules that we must follow. These are our objective proofs. Now you, John, will claim they are wrong, demonstrating how I would tell the difference. And I truly mean this. If you don't clearly demonstrate how you are right and the Scientologists are wrong, we're done. I want a demonstration that you are right." End quote. Again, I'm not claiming that every utterance or every decision has a black and white subjective or objective ruling on it. David is trying desperately to create a stalemate, throwing dung at the wall in the form of Scientology, seeing how much will stick. I stick to my examples of rape as I defined it and shooting starving children as opposed to feeding them being the same as picking ice cream instead of broccoli. The old man still won't admit that there's a possible world where rape as I define it could be tolerated / ignored or condoned / encouraged. He also said, quote, "There are no objective moral truths," end quote, which is an objective term in and of itself. Unless he doesn't really understand the difference between objective and subjective, he may be conflating terms. He's admitted by proxy that the scientific method cannot say that Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Mugabe, General Amin, etc. did anything wrong. Ergo, there's a possible world where the decision to be like Hitler, Pol Pot, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Mugabe, General Amin, etc., or not be like those guys is the same as buying ice cream instead of broccoli. At this point, David has basically thrown in the towel. He keeps asking me for proof after asserting that there are no objective moral truths. He angrily pounds the table after saying there are no objective moral truths and refuses to admit that there's a possible world where rape, as I define it, could be tolerated / ignored or condoned / encouraged. I closed with this as David didn't respond. Quote, "We'll review this again, and thanks for the screenshots, old man." David said there are no objective truths. That's objectively true? If so, he just cut himself off at the knees. If it's subjective, it's a meaningless pushback. Only a person with a room temperature IQ would make such a foolish statement. The logical end to his statements is this. 1. There is a possible world where rape or genocide could be tolerated / ignored or condoned / encouraged. 2. Since the scientific method cannot prove that Hitler, Mugabe, Stalin, Pol Pot, Mao, General Amin, etc. did anything wrong, then the decision to be like them or do the polar opposite is akin to going to Dairy Queen or not going to Dairy Queen. Thanks for playing, Davey, end quote. And then one more quote from David. "If you did that at a normal job, you'd be fired or tested for drugs," end quote. He's frustrated, folks. Quoting David again, quote, "Christianity is a mental delusion," end quote, says the guy who paints himself into a corner and makes self-refuting propositions. Whatever you're smoking, Gramps, pass that over. we've got one more piece of business here. I noticed a lot of the peanut gallery was on Bible Thumping Wing Nut's channel, and was regurgitating and vomiting forth. I went and looked up Matt Dillahunty. What we're talking about here is 350 pounds of real pork. This guy's fat. I found out he is a friend of Russell Glasser, a guy that I've refuted many times. And if you happen to hear this, Russell, I'll be refuting you again at some point. But so Matt is Rusty's fat friend. Here's some guy. They were autistically repeating this. Matt asked you, if I rose from the dead, with a Z, if I rose from the dead, would you believe I was a son of God? Your answer was no, and yet you don't understand. The Matt doesn't immediately presume, blah, blah, blah. It's up there, read it. Matt's example, Fat Matt's example, I like to see this guy debate the Shoney's buffet. Do you notice his example requires an undermining of his entire naturalist viewpoint? If I rose from the dead, which means Matt's example requires a total and complete undermining and destruction of naturalism. Because if somebody rises from the dead, defining dead, somebody who's literally been dead for 3 days, it's not somebody's heart stopping. Someone rises from the dead, then naturalism isn't true. So his example requires an undermining of naturalism. So not very smart, but Boris, I don't know who this guy is, probably some troll. It's funny. It's really funny. But yeah, if you use an example that requires a complete undermining of your own paradigm, then it's not a good example and is thus considered stupid rubbish. Have a nice day. And don't thank me now.